Good morning, everyone. How are you today? This is Jim the Keys Bartender coming to you from Key Largo. A cool, dry, beautiful weather Key Largo in the midst of the spring break. And we'll talk about that a little later, what Miami's doing about it and what the Florida Keys are and all that stuff and what we're seeing. The weather, once again, is gorgeous. Temperature's low. The humidity's low. It's just one of those days. I don't know what happens to someone down here acclimatizing to it, living down here all the time, and you just feel. I mean, I'm sure there's listeners. We have listeners in India and Vietnam, but most of our listeners from the United States, northern parts of the United States. We have listeners from Florida, so they don't recognize it as much, but they're used to a certain level of humidity. And it's uncomfortable. There's a lot of Florida, but finally the population exploded in Florida once air conditioning came about because of the heat. Now, if you look at the old time photos, pre-1960, every businessman down here was wearing one of those linen suits that always looked like, and a hat. And the temperature in the Keys, at least, most of the time it hovers in the lower 80s, mid 80s, and it gets up to the upper 80s, and it just varies with the humidity level because we're surrounded by water, and that's a moderating influence. So when it gets, after being down here a while, you distinctly feel when the humidity drops below 80%, the temperature drops along with it. Just the humidity dropping, you feel the dry air. You could just feel, oh, there's dry air coming in. And you may, if you're attuned to it and you're thinking about it, yeah, you may feel about it up north, but I think you really feel for it down here. Now, the reason I was thinking about it is because of all the videos you have of people every so often. These are middle-aged people who venture outside their houses after an ice storm. And they have an ice-covered sidewalk, and they're on a hill. And you just see them slide down the driveway, or stepping out and just falling on their ass. I know some people get seriously injured from that, but other people just have hilarious video clips because of that. And I was wondering, because by the time I was 16 years old, up north, I knew, even the year or two after that, I knew what it was like to drive on ice, let alone walk. So I was never surprised. It wasn't a surprise when I walked out. I was ready for it. It was how hard it was going to be to go down those steps. But you're doing it carefully. You never do it with the confidence you see in those videos where people walk out, boom. They just look like they're breaking their back. And I thought, well, maybe it's a mix where you have someone from my neck of the woods now who doesn't experience go up there, and it's their first approach to something like that. It's like the people that first time they go through a hurricane. They don't know what it's like. Unless you go through a couple tropical storms and you hear the winds howling for a while, you really don't feel the brunt of it. And some people, if they got the right kind of structure being, they really don't give a shit. But then the other ones, the first time you go through something like that and you hear it the whole time, it kind of breaks you down psychologically to hear that wind howling so hard, so long. I mean, it's similar. I guess it's similar up north to one of those blizzards where you hear the wind and you can just feel the pounding of the snow against the structure that you're in. But how long did it take me to become fluoridated, fluoridized, or how long did the keyification process take? So when it's 60 degrees, I feel a bit chilly when I'm not dressed warmer, or like not being bothered by high temperatures as much, except for people. For me, it's people talking about it, how hot it is. It's planting in your head that you should be uncomfortable. I worked at a tiki hut where the very little air moved, and it could be in the mid 90s with all the people, and very humid, and you just drink a lot of water and you sweat. You know, you tell off. I guess if you're sweating, you get all that salt going through you. You don't necessarily, that salt may take some of the body odor away from you. You know, as long as you're not wearing wet clothing and you're relatively clean, you don't, you know, when you start smelling yourself, that's the key. When you smell, you say, wow, something stinks around here, and it's you. That's usually a thing for that. And I'm sure that happens up north too, because, you know, when you're cold, it's harder to, you get motivated to jump in the shower and shed all that clothes. But down here, I do this rule of thumb when I go out. Not that you need to know, but I'm just telling you. Before I go to the gym, I take a shower because I don't want to be generating odor. I mean, you're always generating odor, generating bad odor, malodor, I guess you call it. An odious odor. And then after I work out, I'll shower and then go into work, right? Or not. Usually there's a minimum of 2 showers a day, prior to the gym and after the gym. So you got to be really adapted to those things, and that's how I handle the heat here. Just make sure you got changes of clothing. You're not carrying around things too much. You're not wearing too much, and I don't necessarily. It's nice to have the windows open. It's really nice. AC's great, but there's nothing like fresh air that comes in. This episode is going to be dedicated to news. And what I have to say about the news is what it is, right? Who dictates what the news is? Depending on what the media source you go to. So if you're a Fox fan, you go to Fox News Network, MSNBC, CNN, BBC, Axios, America Now, Freedom Daily, whatever ones are out there. They dictate what the news is. And some places are driven by their audience, meaning that they deliver the news to the audience that the audience is concerned. So like India may have an online presence, news organization is for Indian expatriates. And it's news that concerns Indians that live outside India. You know, it could be trade, it could be things going on in India, it could be what Indian Americans are doing here and stuff like that. And I'm talking about Asian Indians, not Native Americans or indigenous. But down here, now in the old days, prior to the internet and prior to television, everything was driven by newspapers. Prior to radio and newspapers. Radio came about, that I guess that chipped away that. But let's say prior to 1919, the advent of the wireless, the radio, there were newspapers. And in the big cities, they had morning editions, afternoon editions, and evening editions. Yes, that was just like the morning news, the afternoon news, and the evening news. And they used to move. They had a deadline. And the deadline was like by the minute, not by the day. Nowadays, when you're looking at news, you got to be careful on the internet because you could be looking at something that's 2 days old, 3 days old. And so when it comes, it's interesting as technology has moved ahead where you can instantaneously get news. Yesterday, there was an earthquake near New Zealand, and I was on the internet doing some research on the subject, and they were giving updates on how they were telling people that live near the coast in New Zealand to look out for a tsunami. That was current news. But then that disappeared because there was no tsunami. So that was just, it could have been a big story, and some people want to be on the first wave. So, we still have remnants of older media. And older media today is newspapers. And newspapers also have online presence. And I'll talk about that. But down here in the Keys, especially this part of the Keys, there's several papers. And the local ones, it's a free press. And I forget the other one. Key Largo something. But it's really not. The other one, there's the Coconut Telegraph, and that's not necessarily a newspaper. That's more of a scandal sheet, which is great. And they're driven by their advertisers, not by their readership. And there's a subtle difference there. Even though the bigger newspapers depend on advertising, they also get subscriptions. They get people that pay for the news. They pay for online. They pay for at-home delivery. Well, the free press is exactly what it is. It's the free press. It's free. It doesn't cost anything, meaning it does cost something to them to produce it, but it doesn't cost you to consume it. As well, it shouldn't cost you to consume it because there's very little news that you get. I have never read a moderately important story, and that would be the first place I heard it. I would have heard about it before, and I would hope sometimes to get more in depth about the issue. And a lot of times they do it, and mainly it's zoning issues and things like structures they're building, about building a building in Key Largo, whether they're going to build up on the northern point of the island here, and a community college buildings up there, and having classrooms there, which is great. It's great news. And then they carry local stories. Someone's shot, someone's killed. Years ago, there was a murder that took place over drugs. And I didn't know the people exactly, but I knew the people around it, meaning it's a small community. And I'm assuming I met these people before. And they did that story. But recently, usually the more in-depth stories aren't getting the coverage. I don't see it. Now, they have their hot button issues like the genetically modified mosquitoes. I think it's Oxitec is the name of the company, talking about controlling. And I spoke about it in yesterday's episode. I'm not going to talk about it today. But that's their issue, and they talk about it, and they talk about both sides, whether people that are against it and the people that are for it. And that's a hot news item that they have, and they get their material from the pro-mosquito modified people and the anti-modified people. But there's other stories that just don't get the coverage. But people would find it interesting, which I think is interesting, that there would be such low-hanging fruit hanging there, and they choose not to do it. Now, it could be because they worry about people that come and visit here, and they don't want to cast a negative light on the Keys. Recently, several weeks ago, I guess it was about 3 weeks ago, there was an accident where a motorcycle heading south in Key Largo in the middle of the day was doing in excess of 130, 140 miles an hour. And a car was crossing the road, making a legal crossing of the road from a condominium complex near mile marker 97. Or 97, yeah, around 96 and a half. And the motorcycle hit it at going such a high rate of speed that it flipped the SUV. And later on, they assumed that 4 people died, but they couldn't find a motorcyclist. They assumed the motorcyclist died because of such the horrible damage. Well, the SUV flipped, caught fire immediately, and the people weren't able to be extracted from the vehicle. What they found out later is that most of the body of the motorcyclist was found inside the SUV. And the story had out, and it was when the story made it to the paper, it pretty much was a summary of the highway patrol report. The how, what, where, but not the who as much. They talked a little, maybe they may have mentioned the victims, and then they may have mentioned the person that caused it. Or they may not have, because I didn't find a name until I found a posting on social media. And there were people talking about how great the guy was and all this stuff. And I'm saying, wait, hold on. I would shut up right away. And they were shaming the people that were saying this guy killed 2 people. And he did kill 2 people by his behavior. His behavior directly contributed to the death of 2 people. That is a fact. There's no other explanation for it. Okay? You can blame the contributing factors, but I heard people mention that's such a dangerous part of the highway. It may or may not have been a dangerous part, but what made it such a dangerous part of the highway that day was a guy going 140 miles per hour on his motorcycle. Not the design of the road. Not where the entrances are. Not the direct thing was that. And the person's name, I'm not going to talk about it. But he shouldn't have been lionized in the funeral and talked about. Because if he had lived, he should have been charged with negligent homicide. If not, extreme, what do you call it? Extreme negligence. Because that's almost like firing a gun. And not at anybody in particular, but firing a gun and having a bullet hit someone. But then there was no additional story. There was no story where they were coming from, and that left the rumor mill to go. And the rumor mill just filled the space. When I say filled the space, filled the discussions. Where they were coming from. Where were they coming from? They were coming from a bar going to another bar, and there was another motorcyclist, and the other motorcyclist didn't stop, and they drove around, and you heard stories about the other motorcyclist and a woman going to the guy's place and robbing it. And I don't know why would anybody make up necessarily a story when didn't make it. None of the story. There was no follow up. There was no follow up on whether the person who was along with him and whether they were doing the same speed, whether they were racing each other, and whether could be charged with reckless endangerment. But that was the end of the story. There was no more finding out. It says the story would happen. It just stopped. And you know what was interesting? A lot of people would like to say, I'd like to know more about it. It could have been a more morbid curiosity, but that's the news. The news has always been like that. Just like the Black Dahlia murders in L.A., where the woman's cut in half. That's happened in the 50s or the 40s. That news is morbid. It's not just good news. It's not like guy catches 2 big lobsters, or fish. They talk about it. They talk about the stories. They don't go into depth sometimes about the local. Now another recent one that occurred was a woman, and this was last week, traveling at a high rate of speed around 4:30 in the morning. 4:35 in the morning, hit a power transfer case, maybe transformer or something like that, around mile marker 98 in the southbound, off the southbound lanes of Route 1. immediately killing herself. And I'll go into more detail. But it also caused a blackout in the area and shut down the highway for hours. About 6-7 hours. It shut it down. It shut down the whole highway. The whole southbound highway. And they shut down the schools. All the schools were shut down. And like I said, this is a small community, and there's a lot of places on one way in, one way out. So the people that saw the accident before it was shut down and went by it noticed that there was just pieces of cars. They assumed there was multiple cars in the accident and multiple people that died. But what happened, it was one car that got torn apart by the impact, and one person who they put in multiple body bags. Yes, I'm not going to go into more detail. Now that's extreme. Now a lot of that news also serves as, we'll come back to the motorcycle, acts as a deterrent. Well, this person in this case wasn't, maybe not have been a deterrent, because preliminary reports are that she intended on a suicide, that the accident followed an argument she was having with her partner, and they're from Key West, and they were staying in Key Largo. And there was a story last week about it. I think there was a story about it in the line, but the main story, it's funny, was in the Orlando Sentinel. Not in the Keys Weekly, not in the Free Press. No additional story. In our backyard, in our front yard actually, when it shuts down everything. And so other papers are reporting it. And you're thinking, why wouldn't they report this? Because this is what they want. It's like having a restaurant and you feature something that draws people in. I'm just calling it a restaurant because of Keys Bartender, or like happy hour. You draw people in, you bring them in. Half price drinks, blah, blah, blah. What your lead story is the big story. Everyone was affected. Everyone was affected by that was in the Keys, in the Upper Keys last week, was affected by that accident. All the other stories that occurred in the newspaper this week, and I can barely remember. One is about the genetically modified mosquitoes. One's about some guy that stole a car in Miami and then drove down here in the Keys, which is stupid. Once again, if you're making an escape to drive into the Keys, I don't know if you think there's another exit out of here, but at mile marker 0, that's it. When you go hit Key West, there's no going further unless you get on the ferry. If there's a high-speed ferry, I think, that comes from Naples or something like that. But Naples, Florida, not Naples, Italy. Now, if you're not going to put that big story on the front news, the one where that shuts down all the traffic, what is your choice? High school to extend parking lot? Right? Is that a big story? Or local coffee shop decides to open an outside patio. You're not going to talk about the big story. 2 days ago, yesterday, but 2 days ago, online, I saw a story, and it was not a Keys story. It's from outside the Keys. It says Florida resort community, exclusive Florida resort community, jumps line for vaccine. And I'm thinking, I live near an exclusive Florida resort community. It's called Ocean Reef in North Key Largo. But there's tons of them. It could be Mar-a-Lago or, something like that in Palm Beach. Nope. The next story I saw was exclusive Keys, Florida resort community, jumps line. So there's the story. Shows up. Not really picked up. You don't see it locally. Nobody talks about it locally because so many people, I'll get to that a little later, stuff, are affected by, they're concerned about doing things. I'm not trying to be a gadfly. I don't hate the rich. I don't. I'm much like, who's those crazy people out there that think, when they go, they say they think that people like me, I think Rubio said it, Marco Rubio, that people just hate the rich. No, I do not hate the rich. Someday I would like to be the rich. I know I'm getting a little late start, but I'd like to be part of the rich. But I do hate not hearing a story. I do hate sneaky stuff. I've been sneaky. I've been sneaky before. I've been in relationships. And everyone that's been in more than a few relationships, you've been sneaky before. Not sneaky anymore, though. So let's get back to the fucking issue. So yesterday, CNN picks up on it. And it's a Miami Herald story. Miami Herald initially broke the story. Now, Miami Herald, they're hard news. And that's where hard news comes. Some people call it fake news and stuff like that. They don't want to hear about it. It's fake news. Well, news is news. It objectively isn't, whether it's the right or left. Like Cuomo, the governor of New York, harassing his aides and these young women. That's news. It's objective news. Now, because you don't like it calling it fake, I understand. That's your prerogative. The rest of us view it as news. Just like science. Science is science. Right? News can be objective on how you can be objective with the news by how you interpret it. But some things are so quite clear, like the motorcyclist going 140 miles an hour. That's clear his behavior caused the death of the two people that died. The two innocents that died, let's call it, because he's not an innocent. Once you go 140 miles an hour on the highway with a thing, you're not an innocent. And then when someone says, he regularly goes 140 miles an hour, he may have been popping a wheelie at the same time. He died. Okay. Well, that tends to happen when you go 140 miles an hour and try to pop a wheelie or stuff like that. But once you kill someone else, then you're contributing in their death. Okay, back to the Ocean Reef story. The story goes on CNN. I'll leave that there, for the details to people, but to boil it down, they received 1,200 doses of vaccine in mid-January, followed by Ocean Reef, the gated community in North Carolina. That's, very wealthy people live up there. It's very expensive to get a membership. There was a flurry of contributions to Governor DeSantis' re-election campaign, or one of his campaigns. There was just a flurry of them that came through for it. Now, the governor automatically responded saying there's no connection with that. And Miami Herald, to its credit, the guy came on and says, we did not directly say that the governor had anything to do with that right away. But the denial is interesting in the beginning, when there was no accusation made. Okay? And it is not the first time this has been reported, because there's several other communities have received preferential treatment or skipped the line in Florida. And there were, I'd have to say, wealthier communities that received it. And it's a tendency, if you're wearing glasses that only sees your constituency and you view your constituency as the affluent, you may not have the vision to see that as governor, you're also supposed to take care of everyone else too. Every other citizen, not just the people that voted for you. Because pretty much I'd be screwed here. Because everything is almost Republican now. It's moving that way in the Keys. It's moving that way in Florida. We used to be purple. At some point, they thought they were going to turn blue, but who knows? The whole thing is going one. It's pushing one way. But there's the story. There's the main story, Ocean Reef. Now, next week, the proof in the pudding will be what kind of story will the Free Press print, or if it'll print at all, other than a summarized version of the accusations or of the story, which I predict the being a free press, like I said, they get most of their funding, almost all their funding, is from advertisers. It's not from the people, none of it is from people that read the paper. But, it's like saying, well, if you don't have the stories that people don't want to read, why are you advertising in a paper that no one wants to read? Why open the paper? I opened it this week expecting to hear a little more story about the woman that crashed her car. And I did not hear anything yet. There was no blurb in that. There were other ones. There was an interesting story about a man in Marathon, or near Marathon, I think it was, or south of Marathon. And a woman is sunbathing, and she opens her eyes. And I assume there's a man standing near her masturbating. And she starts screaming. And her companion, boyfriend, is in the water snorkeling. He eventually hears it, and he comes and approaches the guy, and they get into an altercation. And the guy who was caught, and I'm throwing in masturbating because they said he was committing a sex act, and he wasn't assaulting her, so I'm assuming it's masturbating. I don't think he was taking a dildo and shoving it up his ass. But, so the altercation ensues. The guy gets a chokehold. Guy gets the assailant, or not assailant, whatever the guy is, in a chokehold, and he bites him. Eventually, bystanders subdue him, and the police arrive, or the sheriff's department arrives, and they get the whole story. That's in there. That's an interesting story. That would be a good headline story. That would have been a great headline story. It's not the headline story, is it? Headline story was the GM mosquitoes. Which, yes, the people that are concerned about that, that's the number one story. But I'll tell you something. The headline story being man caught masturbating in front of a sunbather is a much bigger headline. And if I was you don't really want that probably as your headline, but then again, it's in the paper anyway. I mean, don't people lead with their best attribute? If someone has good hair, they spend a lot of time on their hair, right? If boobs weren't so important, cosmetic surgery, breast enhancement wouldn't be such a huge slice of, and no pun intended, of plastic surgery. So, last couple of years ago, we had the walking masturbator down the highway who was making his way to the Lover's Boutique. That was a good story, but that was buried inside there too. So whenever it seems to be like a local or someone, they kind of downplay it. It's not as big a story, unless it's one everyone knows anyway, so they might as well repeat it. But it seems as if the Free Press knows what it is and what it isn't. I understand that. And the Miami Herald understands what it is and what it isn't. And on the front section of the Miami Herald, it's a newspaper. It tells the news, good, bad, or ugly, right? So I used to get really disappointed by that. And then I realized, wait a second. Why would the Free Press go? It'd be kind of doing that to spite their face. I, on the other hand, can report on Ocean Reef. I don't get money from them. I don't get money from advertisers yet. I may never get money from advertising. because of what I do. And I'm not saying if I wanted to, and I just want to be that thing where I just go and kiss ass and talk about how great some place is, just like the Catch Restaurant at mile marker 102 Oceanside, which is open daily for lunch and dinner. There you go. Well, I work there. I'm going to advertise that they take care. I consider them a sponsor of this show. And the woman that cuts my hair at Plaza 103, Bayside, Cutting Design by Doris. That's a great place to get your hair cut. Tell them the Keys bartender sent you. She doesn't pay. She just cuts my hair. I love her to death. I just want her to get as much business as possible. I love a good thing. And my friend Dee Dee, who's a hairstylist above Publix. I have my wife who does nail tech down in Almirada. I'm supporting local business. I have Doc's Diner, great place for breakfast. The Conch House, another great place for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Doc's great place for breakfast and lunch. I support these places. And I won't do anything, obviously I won't do anything to probably hurt them. So maybe that's why the free press does it. Maybe they're just like a big brochure. And they do throw in news items. Someone gets murdered, they're going to report it. There was a recent, 4 years ago recently. It'll be 4 years, late September coming up. So that's less than 6 months from now. A woman right around this, for such a small community, it's interesting. There's been a lot of death and mayhem down here. Just as much as people I know have been killed in the Keys as when I knew them in Philadelphia. So safer. It's just like at least in the Keys, you're more likely to be killed by someone you know. Like any place. You don't see these shows on television, Death in Paradise and all this stuff, Murder in Paradise, something in the tropics and all this stuff, right? Because it happens everywhere. It's just the smaller the community, more likely it is someone that you know did it. And in a bigger community, more likely than not, someone you know did it. Right? But there may be more violent things going on where there's more bystanders. It's just crowded. Who knows? It's fucking where it, roll the dice. So, when I put in a thing, the free press isn't necessarily free. They do have their constituency, and their constituency is their advertisers. When it comes to, it depends on who you see your constituency as. My constituency here for the podcast are the listeners. 100% the listeners. I have no other constituency. I have no other. I do get some resources from money from the amount of listens that I get from too. I get some payback from that, and maybe it's like 25 to 30% of my cost. And eventually, I'm going to put in a clothing. I think Apogee affiliate market. I like that. I think I'm going to go with Apogee because this clothes I would wear. So wrinkle-free, soft cotton clothing is great. And I'm thinking that's something I can actually get behind. That's a pre-commercial commercial. But it still won't be my constituency. The great thing about it is I don't think there's any story that would probably hold back from me doing that unless I start doing how cotton contributes to human sex trafficking. Or baby trading. Not that there's such a thing as baby rentals. Remember, I did baby rentals before. Keys Baby Rentals. I did not rent babies. That was the main thing, remember? Keys Baby Rentals, we do not rent babies. That's when I rented baby equipment to vacationers. Yep, I'm a multi-talented guy. Maybe not. Maybe I am not that talented. Oh, and just before we sign off, I just want to say Donald Trump still isn't president. So we'll find out what's the next thing that's going to come up with the Q crowd, and see what other crazy thing that is, and stay alert, because the metadata that they're getting on the cell phones, they're for representatives that were receiving and sending messages to some of the people that were involved with the insurrection, will become big news. Will become big news. Because I imagine, and this is just me, that some of the insurrectionists will be making a bargain with investigators. And that bargain will probably include the offering of messages sent and received from members of Congress. The thing is, numbers don't lie, meaning there's going to be enough people out there that are going to have it. Once a couple fall, one or two fall, and you're going to face some stiff sentences, they will be giving up these people. And that will be very interesting. And how stupid can you be? I mean, if you're going to send a message, literally, I mean, they are stupid, because obviously I know government employees, the FBI agent sent a message to his girlfriend, and going back and forth. I mean, his lover, or whatever it was, prior to Trump, that he hated Trump and she hated Trump, back and forth in a message. Why wouldn't you just say it? Why would you have to send it in the text message? If you're the lover, don't you have like pillow talk? I mean, shitty pillow talk. That's shitty pillow talk. If right before you're about to fuck, you start talking about your political, oh my God, I fucking hate Biden. And then it goes up, or I fucking hate Trump. Or I fucking hate, he was some crazy politician. David Duke. That's some crazy pillow talk. But there are some times you chat, and then when you're apart, you, instead of talking about the body part you appreciate of your lover, that's what you do in 1900s. They would just sing sonnets of how much they love, I love her milky white breast, her long tresses. All that stuff. Why would you send text? Text messages really failed. I get it. I don't really understand, unless if someone's talking, I'm thinking if someone's talking other than, and I'm not talking about Como harassing someone, I'm talking about a reciprocated conversation, a text going back and forth. If someone starts talking, a girl starts talking about someone else like that, I realize the deal is not an affaire de coeur, affair of the heart. It's just two people talking about bullshit. I don't know if they're lovers. I mean, if it's a lover, I'd be talking about the next time we're going to get together. Hey, let's go out for a drink. Let's go, blah, 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 blah. All that bullshit. I don't want to give away all my secrets. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for listening. It's been a particularly long show today. And I'd like to ask you, if you do appreciate the show, if you do me a great favor, share this episode with your friends, your family. Like us on Facebook. Leave us a review on your preferred listening app. Please leave us a review on your preferred listening app. The more reviews we get, the wider the audience we're exposed to. Much like the guy in the Lower Keys who exposed himself, but not as offensive. Okay? Send us a message if you have any questions to jim@keysbartender.com. I'd like to thank you for listening, and here we go, signing off. Talk to you later. Bye.